The massive chamber of the Galactic Council had never seen such fear before. Representatives from 60 different species sat in their designated seats, but none of them looked comfortable. The air recycling systems worked overtime to handle the mix of different atmospheric requirements, creating a low hum that filled the silence between nervous whispers. Ambassador Zethrin of the Vorthan Empire stood at the center platform, his 6 eyes scanning the assembled crowd. The Vorthans were known throughout the galaxy as warriors who had never retreated from any battle in their 3,000-year history. Today, Zethrin's scaled hands shook as he held the datapad containing the latest reports. Fellow representatives, Zethrin began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute despair. I bring news that will change everything we know about survival in this galaxy. He activated the massive holographic display that dominated the chamber's center. The familiar spiral of their home galaxy appeared, but now it was marked with spreading zones of red. The Devourers have returned from the void between galaxies. In the past 30 rotations, they have consumed the Kellan system completely. The Nexus Prime colony with its 12 billion inhabitants is gone. The fortress worlds of Drakmor, that withstood siege for 5 centuries, fell in less than 6 hours. A collective gasp rose from the assembly. The fortress worlds of Drakmor were legendary. Their defensive systems could stop entire battle fleets. Their population was known for fighting to the last being rather than surrender. If Drakmor had fallen so quickly, nowhere was safe. Council leader Vextar, whose crystalline body normally glowed with calm blue light, now pulsed with agitated red patterns. Show them the combat footage, Vextar commanded. Though the words came out like a death sentence, the hologram shifted to show the final transmission from Drakmor Prime. The massive city planet appeared on screen, its surface covered with defensive towers and shield generators. Then the Devourers came into view. They looked like living shadows the size of mountains, moving through space without ships or technology. When they touched the planetary shields, the energy barriers simply ceased to exist. When they landed on the surface, entire sections of the planet began to dissolve into cosmic dust. They do not destroy, Zethrin continued, his voice barely above a whisper. They consume. They take the matter, the energy, even the information that makes up our worlds and our people. They leave nothing behind but empty space. General Koros of the Mandarian war clans, a being whose 4 arms had personally wielded weapons in over 100 battles, stood up slowly. What does our combined military analysis suggest? He asked, though his tone indicated he already feared the answer. Complete withdrawal to core systems, replied Admiral Thexis of the Galactic Defense Network. Every simulation shows the same result. Our weapons cannot harm them. Our shields cannot stop them. Our fastest ships cannot outrun them. The only logical response is strategic retreat to the galactic center and hope they lose interest. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Representatives shouted in dozens of languages, their universal translators working frantically to keep up. The Corvin delegate accused the military of cowardice. The Altarian ambassador demanded to know why their advanced technology was useless. The Zentari representative simply stood up and walked out, presumably to begin evacuation procedures for his entire species. Vextar's crystalline form blazed with bright white light, the equivalent of shouting for attention. Silence. We are here to find solutions, not to blame each other for circumstances beyond our control. There are no solutions, Admiral Thexis replied bluntly. The Devourers are not like any enemy we have faced before. They are not interested in conquest or resources or territory. They exist only to consume, and they cannot be reasoned with, bribed, or intimidated. Every species that has encountered them has either fled or been devoured. Dr. Nexon, the galaxy's leading expert on ancient civilizations, activated his personal Display. I have studied the historical records from the last time the Devourers appeared, approximately 50,000 years ago. The progenitor races, who built technology we still cannot understand, tried everything. They built weapons that could crack moons. They created shields that could stop supernovas. They developed ships that could travel between galaxies in days. Nothing worked. The progenitors only survived by fleeing to other galaxies and waiting millions of years for the Devourers to go dormant. So we run, General Koros said bitterly. The greatest military powers in galactic history become refugees in our own home. There is one other option, said a quiet voice from the back of the chamber. All heads turned to see Ambassador Quillen, of the Arcturian Science Collective, a species known more for their research than their military might. We could ask for help. From whom? Zethrin demanded. Every major power in this galaxy is represented here. The hegemony of Thousand Suns has already abandoned their outer territories. The Crystal Empire has sealed their borders. Even the machine intelligences of the Sigma networks have gone into isolation mode. From the humans, Quillen replied simply. Chamber fell completely silent. Then, slowly, laughter began to spread among the representatives. Not joyful laughter, but the bitter sound of beings who had reached the end of hope. The humans? General Koros chuckled darkly. The species that has existed in space for less than one of their centuries? The ones who still use chemical rockets. For some of their transportation? What could they possibly offer that we cannot provide ourselves? They have something we have lost, Quillen said, his voice growing stronger. They have not learned to be afraid of impossible odds. Vextar's glow shifted to curious yellow. Explain. I have been studying human behavior since they achieved faster-than-light travel 50 of their years ago. Every other species in the galaxy follows logical patterns when faced with superior enemies. We analyze the threat, calculate our chances, and make rational decisions based on survival probability. Humans do not follow these patterns. Quillen activated his own display, showing various human historical records. When faced with enemies that outnumbered them 1,000 to 1, they did not retreat. When their home planet was threatened by environmental collapse, they did not abandon it. They adapted. When they encountered hostile alien species with superior technology, they did not hide. They learned. That proves they are foolish, not brave, Admiral Thexus countered. Does it? Quillen asked. Human space continues to expand even as our territories contract. Their colonies grow stronger while ours prepare for evacuation. Their military, though primitive by our standards, has never lost engagement with any alien force they have encountered. Dr. Nixon leaned forward with interest. What are you suggesting, Ambassador Quillen? I am suggesting that perhaps survival is not always about having the best weapons or the strongest shields. Perhaps survival is about being too stubborn to accept defeat. The chamber remained quiet as the assembled representatives considered this idea. The notion that a primitive species might succeed where advanced civilizations had failed seemed absurd. Yet the alternative was abandoning their homes and hoping the Devourers would eventually leave. Even if we accepted this theory, Zethrin said slowly, why would the humans help us? We have offered them little friendship over the years. Most of our species view them as aggressive newcomers who expand too quickly and ask too many questions. Because, Quillen replied with certainty, everything I have learned about humans suggests they cannot resist a challenge that everyone else considers impossible. The greater the odds against success, the more determined they become. Vex stars, form pulsed with deep purple, the color of serious consideration. Very well, we will make contact with the human government. If they refuse, we lose nothing but time. If they agree to help, perhaps their unique perspective will reveal options we have overlooked. And if they get themselves killed fighting an enemy that has defeated civilizations far more advanced than theirs. General Koros asked. Then at least someone will have tried to fight instead of simply running away, Bextar replied grimly. Send a message to the human territories. Request an immediate meeting with their military leadership. Tell them the galaxy needs their help. As the council session ended and representatives began filing out to prepare their species for possible evacuation, none of them truly believed that humanity could succeed where they had failed. But in a galaxy facing extinction, even the smallest hope was worth pursuing. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair aboard the U's Defiant, watching the stars drift past through the main view screen. The ship was 3 days into a routine patrol along the outer edge of human space, checking trade routes and making sure no pirates were bothering merchant vessels. At 35 years old, Jake had been commanding starships for almost a decade, and he thought he had seen everything the galaxy could throw at him. Captain, we're getting something strange on long-range sensors, called out Lieutenant Lisa Campbell from the communications station. She was young, maybe 26, but she had proven herself reliable during their 2 years serving together. There's a ship approaching from outside our territory, but it's not using any identification codes we recognize. Jake turned his chair to face her. Pirates trying a new trick? I don't think so, sir. The ship is huge, maybe 10 times bigger than anything we've ever built. The design doesn't match any known human or alien patterns in our database. And Captain, they're broadcasting on every frequency at once, using what sounds like dozens of different languages. Put it on speakers, Jake ordered. He had dealt with alien traders before, and while most encounters were peaceful, it never hurt to be careful. The bridge filled with a mixture of sounds that hurt to listen to. Electronic beeps mixed with what sounded like whale songs, which overlapped, with mechanical clicking noises and something that might have been music if played by creatures with completely different ideas about harmony. The universal translator is having trouble with this, Lisa reported, adjusting controls at her station. It keeps switching between different translation protocols, like the messages being sent in multiple alien languages simultaneously. Can you make sense of any of it? Bits and pieces, sir. I'm getting words like urgent, request, council, and human. Wait, there's something clearer now. Lisa pressed more buttons, and suddenly one voice emerged from the chaos, speaking. Accented but understandable English. Human vessel, this is Ambassador Zethrin, representing the Galactic Council. We request immediate communication with your commanding officer regarding a matter of extreme urgency affecting all life in this galaxy. Jake raised an eyebrow. In all his years in space, he had never heard of anything called the Galactic Council. Humanity had encountered maybe a dozen alien species since achieving faster-than-light travel, but most of them were either traders who wanted to do business or isolationists who wanted humans to stay away from their territory. Lisa, open a channel, Jake ordered. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Defiant. Ambassador Zethrin, I have to admit I've never heard of the Galactic Council. Could you explain who you represent and why you need to speak? With us, the view screen flickered and changed from the star field to show the interior of the alien ship. Jake tried not to show his surprise at what he saw. The creature facing him stood nearly 8 feet tall, with scales that shifted color, from green to blue as it moved. It had 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows across its face, and what looked like gills along its neck. Despite its alien appearance, Jake could somehow tell that the being was afraid. Captain Morrison, I represent an alliance of 60 species that have worked together to maintain peace and stability in this galaxy for over 10,000 of your years. We are facing a threat that may end all intelligent life, and we believe humanity may be uniquely qualified to help us. Jake leaned back in his chair. Ambassador, with all due respect, humans have only been traveling between stars for about 50 years. We're still using fusion reactors, while some of the aliens we've met have technology that might as well be magic to us. What could we possibly offer that your advanced civilizations can't handle themselves? The alien scales shifted to darker colors, and its 6 eyes all focused directly on Jake through the screen. Captain, may I ask you a question about human history? Go ahead. In your year 1940, the nation called Britain faced an enemy that controlled most of Europe and had military forces many times larger than their own. Logic said they should surrender or flee to other continents. What did they do instead? Jake smiled slightly. They kept fighting, alone for over a year until other allies could join them. Exactly. When the logical choice was surrender, humans chose to fight against impossible odds. This pattern appears throughout your species' history. You have a phrase, I believe, never give up. We do, but I'm still not seeing how this helps with your problem. What exactly are you facing? The view screen changed to show a holographic map of the galaxy. Large sections were marked in red, and Jake could see the red zones were spreading toward the areas marked as human territory. They are called the Devourers, Zethrin explained. They are not a species as you would understand it. They are creatures of pure hunger that consume entire worlds, leaving nothing behind but empty space. They appeared at the edge of our galaxy 30 rotations ago, and have been moving inward ever since. Jake studied the map. What have you tried to stop them? Everything. Our most powerful weapons cannot harm them. Our strongest shields cannot block them. Our fastest ships cannot outrun them. Every species that has encountered them has either fled or been completely destroyed. And you want humans to fight these things? We want humans to show us how to fight them, Zethrin corrected. Every species in the Galactic Council follows the same logical patterns when faced with superior enemies. We analyze the threat, calculate our chances of success, and make rational decisions based on survival probability. But humans do not seem to follow these patterns. Jake stood up and walked closer to the view screen. You're right about that. We tend to be stubborn when people tell us something is impossible. That is precisely why we need your help. Our military analysts insist that the Devourers cannot be defeated. Our scientists claim that no defense can be mounted against them. Our leaders have ordered full retreat to the galactic core. But perhaps human military thinking will see options that we have missed. How much time do we have? At their current rate of expansion, the Devourers will reach human space in approximately 200 of your days. The outer colonies of our member species are already being evacuated. Jake turned to look at his crew. Lisa was listening intently, her fingers already working to record everything for transmission back to Earth Command. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Torres, his tactical officer, was studying the galactic map with the focused expression he got when analyzing battle scenarios. Chief Engineer Betty Adams was reviewing the technical data about the alien ship, probably trying to figure out how their technology worked. Captain, Ryan said quietly, if these things are as dangerous as the ambassador claims, we need to get this information to Earth immediately. Agreed, Jake replied. Then he turned back to the screen. Ambassador Zethrin, I'm just one ship captain in Earth's exploration fleet. I can't make decisions for all of humanity, but I can promise you that we'll get your message to the right people. We understand, Captain. However, time is critical. Would it be possible for you to accompany me to meet with the Galactic Council directly? Your perspective as a military officer might help them understand human capabilities. Jake thought for a moment. Taking his ship into completely unknown space to meet with aliens he had never heard of was definitely not covered in Earth Command regulations. On the other hand, if this threat was real, humanity needed to know about it as soon as possible. I'll need to contact my superiors first, but assuming they approve, I can accompany you. However, I want to make something clear, Ambassador. What is that, Captain? If these devourers are heading toward human space, then this isn't just your problem anymore. Humans don't run from fights, especially when our homes are threatened. If your council wants our help, they're going to get it whether they're ready for our methods or not. For the first time since the conversation began, the alien scales shifted to brighter colors, and Jake got the impression that Zethrin was pleased. Captain Morrison, I believe that is exactly the attitude the galaxy needs right now. Jake smiled, the same confident grin that had gotten him out of trouble more times than he could count. In that case, Ambassador, let's go save the galaxy. 3 days later, Jake Morrison found himself standing in the most incredible place he had ever seen. The Galactic Council Station was a massive structure that seemed to have been built by combining the architectural styles of dozens of different species. Crystalline towers twisted alongside metal frameworks, while organic-looking sections grew between geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The council chamber itself was enormous, easily large enough to hold 1,000 beings. Representatives from 60 different species sat in specially designed seats that accommodated everything from tiny, floating gas bag creatures to massive rock-like beings that needed reinforced platforms. The air shimmered with different atmospheric zones, and Jake could hear the constant hum of life support systems working to keep everyone alive in the same space. Dr. Patricia Wells stood beside Jake, her eyes wide with scientific fascination. Earth Command had assigned her to accompany him as humanity's expert on alien biology and behavior. She had spent the journey studying every piece of data the Council had provided about the Devourers, and Jake could tell she was both excited and terrified by what she had learned. Captain Morrison, Ambassador Zethrin said, approaching them with what Jake was beginning to recognize as the alien equivalent of nervous energy. The Council is ready to hear humanity's perspective on our situation. Jake nodded and followed Zethrin toward the center of the chamber. As they walked, conversations in dozens of languages quieted down, and Jake became aware that hundreds of alien eyes were focused on him. Some of the beings looked curious, others appeared skeptical, and a few seemed openly hostile. Council leader Vextar, the crystalline being whose body pulsed with different colored lights, gestured for Jake to approach the central platform. Captain Morrison, we welcome you to this emergency session of the Galactic Council. We understand that your species has agreed to review our situation and offer your analysis. That's correct, Jake replied, his voice carrying clearly through the chambers. Translation systems. Dr. Wells and I have studied all the data you provided about these devourers. We've also consulted with our military strategists and scientists back on Earth. And what is humanity's conclusion? Asked General Koros. His forearms crossed in what Jake suspected was a skeptical gesture. Jake looked around the chamber, meeting as many alien gazes as he could. With respect, General, I think you've been approaching this problem completely wrong. A ripple of surprised sounds echoed through the chamber. Several representatives began speaking at once in their native languages, creating a cacophony that the translation system struggled to handle. Vextar's crystalline form blazed with bright light, calling for silence. Please explain your reasoning, Captain. Dr. Wells stepped forward, activating a portable holographic projector that displayed the devourer movement patterns. Every species in this council has responded to the devourers the same way. You analyze their capabilities, compare them to your own, calculate the odds of success, and make logical decisions based on survival probability. That is correct, Admiral Fexus replied. It is how civilized beings have conducted warfare for millennia. But the Devourers aren't civilized beings, Jake said. They're not even really alive the way we understand life. They're more like a natural disaster that moves through space. You don't fight a hurricane by calculating odds or following military doctrine. You adapt to survive it. General Koros leaned forward, What do you mean, adapt? Jake smiled, and several aliens instinctively shifted in their seats. Something about human facial expressions seemed to make other species nervous. Dr. Wells showed them the Earth history files. The holographic display changed to show images from human history. Primitive humans hunting massive mammoths, ancient civilizations building impossible structures, armies crossing frozen rivers to attack enemies who thought they were safe. Humans evolved on a planet that was constantly trying to kill us, Dr. Wells explained. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, plagues, predators that were bigger and stronger than us. We survived not by being the strongest or the smartest, but by being the most adaptable. When early humans encountered saber-toothed cats that could kill them easily, they didn't retreat to safe territories, Jake continued. They figured out how to use fire and tools to turn their weakness into strength. When the climate changed and destroyed their food sources, they didn't starve. They learned to eat different things and live in different places. The chamber remained quiet, but Jake could sense that he had their attention. The problem with your approach to the Devourers is that you're thinking like prey animals, Jake said bluntly. Every response has been defensive. Stronger shields, faster ships, safer hiding places. But humans learned long ago that sometimes the best defense is a completely unexpected offense. Dr. Nexon, the archaeological expert, activated his own display. Captain Morrison, I have studied the records from the last time the Devourers appeared. The progenitor races tried everything. They had technology that could manipulate matter at the subatomic level, weapons that could destroy stars, defenses that could stop time itself. Nothing worked. Because they were still thinking defensively, Jake replied. They were trying to build better walls instead of finding the enemy's weakness. The Devourers have no weakness, Admiral Thexus stated firmly. They are immune to all forms of energy weapons. They cannot be stopped by physical barriers, and they regenerate from any damage we inflict. Dr. Wells smiled, and Jake noticed that human expressions seemed to be contagious among the assembled aliens. Several of them were beginning to show what might have been curiosity instead of skepticism. Admiral, you just told us 3 very important pieces of information, Dr. Wells said. The Devourers are immune to energy weapons, which means they interact with energy in specific ways. They cannot be stopped by physical barriers, which tells us something about their relationship with matter. And they regenerate from damage, which means they have some kind of self-repair mechanism. How does that help us? Zethrin asked. Because, Jake said, his grin widening, every system has limits, and every strength can become a weakness if you approach it from the right angle. Jake activated his own datapad, showing a series of calculations that had been developed by Earth's best military minds. The Devourers consume matter and energy to sustain themselves. They break down complex structures into simpler components. But what happens if you give them something they can't break down? What happens if you feed them something that makes them sit instead of stronger? The chamber erupted in excited chatter as the implications began to sink in. Jake could see alien minds working through possibilities that had never occurred to them before. You're suggesting we poison them somehow? General Koros asked. I'm suggesting we stop thinking like prey and start thinking like humans, Jake replied. We're not going to outgun them or outrun them, but maybe we can outthink them. Vextar's crystalline form pulsed with rapid color changes that Jake was learning to interpret as intense interest. What specifically do you propose, Captain? Morrison? First, we need to understand exactly how the Devourers consume matter and energy. Then we need to find ways to disrupt that process. Instead of trying to kill them, we make it impossible for them to feed. Instead of running away, we give them reasons to avoid our territory. Dr. Wells nodded enthusiastically. Human military. History is full of examples of smaller forces defeating larger ones through unconventional tactics. We use the enemy's strengths against them. This is madness, Admiral Thexus protested. You're talking about engaging an enemy that has destroyed civilizations far more advanced than yours. Admiral, Jake said, his voice taking on the tone he used when giving orders to his crew. Every species in this chamber has survived by being logical and cautious. That's why you're all here having this conversation instead of being consumed by the devourers. But sometimes survival requires doing something that looks completely insane to everyone else. What do you need from us? Vexstar asked quietly. Resources, technology, and most importantly, the willingness to try something that has never been attempted before, Jake replied. We're going to need volunteers from every species, because this will only work if we combine human adaptability with your advanced technology. And if your plan fails? General Koros asked. Jake's smile became something that would have terrified any human who saw it, but seemed to fill the alien council members with unexpected confidence. Then at least, we'll fail while fighting instead of running away. And in my experience, that's usually when humans do their best work. 6 weeks after the Galactic Council meeting, Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, watching something that should have been impossible. The Kepler 442 system stretched out before them, home to over 2 billion Altarian civilians who had refused to evacuate despite the approaching devourer swarm. The aliens believed their world was lost, but Jake had convinced them to give humanity's plan one chance. The combined fleet that surrounded Jake's ship looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen before. 50 human vessels of various sizes flew alongside alien ships that had been modified with human technology and tactics. The sleek Vorthan warships now carried strange human contraptions bolted to their hulls. The massive Craxian battlecruisers had been fitted with devices that made no sense to traditional military thinking. Captain, we're getting reports from all scout ships, Lieutenant Lisa Campbell announced from her station. The devourers have completely surrounded the system. They're beginning to move toward the inner planets. Jake nodded grimly. Through the view screen, he could see dark shapes the size of mountains drifting through space like living shadows. There were thousands of them, each one capable of consuming an entire moon in a matter of hours. Every military expert in the galaxy said this battle was already lost. Ryan, what's our tactical situation? Jake asked his tactical officer. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Torres looked up from his displays with the focused expression that had become familiar to the entire crew. All human ships are in position throughout the asteroid field. The alien vessels are maintaining formation at the outer edge of the system. The Altarian evacuation ships are standing by, but they've only managed to get about 10% of the population off planet. Good enough, Jake said, settling into his command chair. Lisa, open a channel to all ships in the fleet. Channel open, sir. Jake took a deep breath. In a few minutes, they would either prove that human tactics could work against an impossible enemy, or they would become the first species in galactic history to voluntarily fight the devourers in open combat. All ships, this is Admiral Morrison, Jake said, still getting used to the emergency promotion that had come with command of all the joint fleet. You all know what we're facing. You all know that every computer simulation says we're about to die. But remember what we learned about humans. Sometimes the most logical response to impossible odds is to ignore the odds entirely. He paused, looking around at his crew. Lisa was monitoring communications from dozens of different species. Ryan was coordinating targeting data with alien tactical systems. Chief Engineer Betty Adams was managing power distribution between human and alien, technologies that had never been designed to work together. The devourers expect us to run or hide, or try to outgun them with bigger weapons, Jake continued. Instead, we're going to give them something they've never encountered before, an enemy that refuses to play by the rules they understand. All ships execute Plan Charlie in 30 seconds. The next few moments would have looked like chaos to any traditional military observer. Instead of forming orderly battle lines or taking defensive positions, the human ships scattered throughout the system like debris from an explosion. Some headed directly toward the gas giant's massive gravity well. Others disappeared into the dense asteroid field. A few actually flew straight at the Devourer formation, as if they intended to ram them. Captain Julie Parker of the Use Resilient led the first wave of the attack, but calling it an attack would have confused most military analysts. Instead of firing weapons at the Devourers, her ship began releasing thousands of small objects into space. The objects looked like simple metal spheres, but each one contained a surprise that human scientists had been working on for weeks. "Julie, you're clear for Phase 1, Jake transmitted to her ship. "Understood, Admiral. Beginning dispersal pattern now." The metal spheres spread out through space, carried by the system's gravitational currents and solar winds. To the Devourers, they probably looked like harmless debris. The massive shadow creatures continued their approach toward the inner planets, paying no attention to the tiny objects floating around them. Then the spheres began to activate. Dr. Patricia Wells had discovered something interesting about the Devourers during her analysis of the Council's data. The creatures consumed matter by breaking it down into component atoms and absorbing the released energy. But human scientists had developed something the Devourers had never encountered before, matter that became more complex when exposed to their feeding process instead of simpler. "Admiral, sensors are showing energy spikes throughout the Devourer formation," Ryan reported. "The spheres are working exactly as predicted." Jake smiled as he watched the tactical display. Each sphere contained a carefully designed mixture of unstable elements that reacted to the Devourer's feeding process by creating a chain reaction. Instead of providing energy, the spheres were forcing the creatures to spend energy trying to digest something that kept becoming more complicated. "Phase 2, all ships," Jake ordered. This was where human tactics truly diverged from galactic military doctrine. Instead of pressing their advantage with more of the same attack, the human ships began doing something completely unexpected. They started helping the DEVOURERS. Captain Dan Miller of the UES Intrepid led a squadron of ships that began herding asteroids directly into the path of the confused creatures. But these weren't ordinary asteroids. Human engineers had spent weeks injecting them with the same unstable compounds that were in the spheres. "It's working," Dr. Wells announced from her position at the science station. "The Devourers are trying to consume the asteroids, but each one is making them weaker instead of stronger." The massive creatures began to show signs of distress. Their movement patterns became erratic, and Jake could see some of them actually trying to retreat from the asteroid field. For the first time in galactic history, the Devourers were experiencing something they couldn't simply consume and digest. "Admiral, we're getting reports from Captain Rodriguez in the outer system," Lisa called out. "The Devourer formation near. The gas giant is breaking up. They seem to be avoiding the gravitational anomalies we created." Jake nodded with satisfaction. The gravity mines had been Ryan's idea, devices that created unstable gravitational fields that confused the Devourer's ability to sense matter and energy. The creatures weren't being hurt by them, but they couldn't figure out how to consume something that kept changing its fundamental properties. "Phase 3, Jake announced. "Time to show them what happens when you corner a human." The final phase of the plan would have been considered suicidal by any rational military standard. The remaining human ships began flying directly at the Devourers, not to attack them, but to lead them away from the populated planets and toward the system's outer edge. Captain Julie Parker's voice crackled over the communications system as her ship dove between two massive Devourers that were trying to regroup. "Admiral, they're following us. but they're moving slower than before. The energy drain from the spheres is definitely affecting them. Keep them moving, Julie. Lead them toward the jump point. What Jake had realized, and what the galactic military had missed, was that the Devourers weren't unstoppable forces of nature. They were predators that had evolved to hunt prey that followed predictable patterns. When faced with prey that actively made itself harder to digest, they became confused and cautious. Admiral, long-range sensors are detecting something at the edge of the system, Ryan reported, his voice tense with excitement. The main Devourer formation is withdrawing. They're actually retreating. Jake stood up from his command chair and walked to the view screen. Through the transparent aluminum, he could see the dark shapes of the Devourers moving away from Kepler 442, heading back toward the empty space between star systems. All ships, this is Admiral Morrison, Jake announced to the fleet. Mission accomplished. The Devourers are withdrawing from the system. All civilian evacuation ships, you are clear to return to normal operations. The bridge erupted in cheers, and Jake could hear similar celebrations coming through the communication channels from both human and alien ships. For the first time in galactic history, someone had faced the Devourers in open combat and won. Captain, Dr. Wells said quietly, we didn't actually destroy them. They could come back. I know, Jake replied, still watching the retreating shapes. But we proved something important today. We proved that they can be stopped. More importantly, we proved that sometimes the best way to fight an impossible enemy is to make yourself impossible to digest. As the combined fleet began regrouping and damage reports came in, Jake realized that everything had changed. The galaxy's apex predators had learned that there was one species they couldn't simply consume, a species too stubborn to accept that some fights couldn't be won. 8 months after the Battle of Kepler 442, Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the observation lounge of the Deep Space Training Station, watching something that would have been impossible to imagine a year ago. Through the massive transparent walls, he could see human and alien crews working side by side on joint military exercises. Vorthan warriors practiced boarding techniques with human marines. Craxian engineers collaborated with Earth technicians to build new types of defensive systems. Even the cautious Altarians had sent representatives to learn what they called human tactical thinking. The galaxy had changed in ways that surprised everyone. The Devourers had not returned to attack any major systems since their retreat from Kepler 442, but long-range sensors detected them moving through the empty spaces between star systems. They seemed to be avoiding areas where human-designed defenses had been installed, creating a strange kind of standoff that no one had expected. Admiral Morrison, came a familiar voice from behind him. Jake turned to see Ambassador Zethrin approaching. His scales showing the bright colors that Jake had learned indicated contentment. The Council has finished reviewing your latest tactical proposals. And? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The Galactic Council had been enthusiastically adopting human military concepts ever since word of the victory at Kepler 442 had spread throughout civilized space. They have approved the establishment of 15 more joint training facilities and agreed to standardize the unstable matter protocols across all member fleets. Zethrin replied, General Koros asked me to tell you that the Mandarian war clans are officially adopting what they call Morrison Doctrine as part of their standard military curriculum. Jake smiled at that. 6 months ago, General Koros had been openly skeptical of human capabilities. Now the four-armed warrior was one of the most enthusiastic supporters of joint human-alien military cooperation. Dr. Patricia Wells entered the lounge carrying a datapad filled with her latest research. She had been promoted to Director of Xenocultural Military Studies, a position that had been created specifically for her work on adapting human tactics to alien psychology and technology. "Jake, you need to see the latest reports from the frontier surveys," she said, her voice carrying the excitement. That had become her trademark when discussing new discoveries. The Devourers aren't just avoiding our defended systems. They're actively changing their movement patterns to stay away from any area where human tactical principles are being used. "What does that mean exactly?" Zethrin asked. "It means they're learning," Patricia explained. "The Devourers have encountered thousands of different species over millions of years, and they've always been able to adapt to conventional military responses. But human tactics are based on principles they've never seen before: unpredictability, adaptation, and the willingness to turn weaknesses into strengths." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "So they're avoiding us because they can't figure out how to counter something that doesn't follow logical patterns." "Exactly. And it's having an unexpected effect on the rest of the galaxy. Species that had been retreating to their core worlds are beginning to expand again. Trade routes that had been abandoned are reopening. The Zentari Republic has even established new colonies and systems they evacuated 6 months ago." Through the observation windows, Jake could see the training exercises continuing. A group of human pilots was teaching Arcturian navigators how to use asteroid fields as tactical advantages instead of obstacles to avoid. On another platform, Vorthan warriors were learning from human special forces how to turn their natural camouflage abilities into unpredictable assault tactics. "There's something else," Patricia continued, lowering her voice. "The psychological studies we've been conducting on member species show an interesting pattern. Exposure to human tactical thinking isn't just teaching them new military techniques. It's changing how they approach problems in general." "How so?" Jake asked. Species that had been following the same technological and social development patterns for thousands of years are suddenly experimenting with new approaches. The Craxian Science Council has started encouraging what they call irrational research. Projects, studies that don't have obvious practical applications. The Altarian government has implemented something they're calling constructive disagreement policies that reward citizens for challenging established procedures. Zethrin's scales shifted to curious yellow patterns. "Are you saying that contact with humans is changing our fundamental nature as species?" "Not changing," Patricia corrected, reminding. "Every intelligent species has the capacity for creativity and adaptation. But most galactic civilizations have spent so long optimizing their approaches that they've forgotten how to improvise. Humans are teaching them that sometimes the best solution is the one that doesn't make sense to anyone else." Jake was interrupted by his communication device beeping with an urgent message. He activated the display and saw the face of Captain Lisa Campbell, who had been promoted to command her own ship after the Kepler 442 victory. "Admiral, we're getting reports from deep space monitoring stations," Lisa said, her voice tense. "Long range. Sensors have detected a massive Devourer formation moving toward the galactic rim. They seem to be heading for the space between galaxies." Jake felt a mixture of relief and concern. "Are they leaving permanently?" "Unknown, sir. But their movement pattern suggests they're not planning to return anytime soon. The xenobiology teams think they might be entering some kind of dormancy cycle." After ending the communication, Jake turned back to his companions. "It looks like we might have bought ourselves some time." "Time for what?" Zethrin asked. "Time to finish what we started," Jake replied. "The Devourers will be back eventually. Maybe in a few years, maybe in a few centuries. But when they return, they won't be facing the same galaxy they left behind." Patricia nodded with understanding. "You're talking about permanent change." "I'm talking about teaching the galaxy to think like humans when it matters most," Jake said. "Not just in military situations, but in every aspect of civilization. When the next impossible challenge appears, whether it's the Devourers or something we haven't imagined yet, the galaxy will be ready to respond with creativity instead of just logic." Through the observation windows, they could see a new group of trainees arriving at the station. These weren't military personnel, but civilian engineers, scientists, and administrators who had volunteered to learn human problem-solving techniques. The program had started as a military initiative, but it was rapidly expanding into every aspect of galactic civilization. You know, Zethrin said thoughtfully, when the Council first decided to contact humanity, we were looking for someone desperate enough to fight an unwinnable battle. We never expected to find teachers. That's because you were thinking like prey instead of predators. Jake replied with the confident grin that had become his trademark throughout the galaxy. Humans didn't survive on Earth by being the strongest or the smartest. We survived by being too stubborn to give up and too creative to stay beaten. A young human technician approached their group, carrying reports from the latest training exercises. Jake recognized him as Tony Chun, one of the recent graduates from the Earth Naval Academy who had volunteered for the Joint Operations Program. Admiral, the Vorthan combat teams have successfully completed the irregular warfare course, Tony reported. They're requesting permission to design their own variation of the tactics for use in zero-gravity environments. Approved, Jake said immediately. And make sure their innovations get shared with all the other species combat units. As Tony hurried away to coordinate the information exchange, Patricia smiled. 6 months ago, the Vorthans would never have suggested modifications to established procedures. Now they're actively improving on human designs. That's the point, Jake said. We're not trying to make aliens think exactly like humans. We're trying to remind them that they have the same capacity for adaptation and creativity that helped humans survive impossible odds. Zethrin's scales brightened to the patterns Jake had learned, indicated deep satisfaction. Admiral Morrison, I believe humanity has given the galaxy something more valuable than victory over the Devourers. What's that? Hope. For the first time in thousands of years, our species are looking at challenges as opportunities instead. OF threats to be avoided. Jake looked out at the training stations, where dozens of species were learning to work together in ways that had never been attempted before. Human instructors were teaching alien students, but they were also learning from their students' unique perspectives and capabilities. The result was something entirely new, a galactic civilization that combined the best of human adaptability with thousands of years of alien knowledge and technology. The Devourers thought they were dealing with prey, Jake said quietly. They didn't realize they had wandered into a galaxy full of predators who had just forgotten how to hunt. As the training exercises continued around them, Jake felt confident that when the next impossible challenge faced galactic civilization, it would find a very different enemy than the one the Devourers had encountered. It would find a galaxy that had remembered how to be human when it mattered most.